You wake up, brush your teeth, grab your phone and see that there's no bad news. No one died. Your job is stable, the bills are paid for the month, there's food in the fridge, and you even manage to sleep well. There's no tragedy looming over you. And yet, something feels off. A sensation you can't quite name, but it's there, present like a heavy breeze inside your chest. A lack of enthusiasm, an echo of silence behind your eyes, as if your soul had turned off the sound of the world. And the strangest part of all, there's no clear reason to feel this way. It's as if you've been invaded by a secret sadness, a melancholy that didn't ask for permission to enter, and now hides behind the automatic gestures of daily life. And you begin to wonder, how can you feel bad when everything seems fine? The truth is, this kind of sadness, silent, sneaky, without catastrophe, is more common than we think, but few people talk about it because it doesn't scream. It doesn't break anything. It doesn't paralyze like a panic attack or shout like a deep depression. It just settles in, disguised as fatigue, as laziness, as boredom, as "I'm not feeling great today, but it'll pass." Except it doesn't. And because it has no name, you don't even know how to ask for help. You wait for it to go away on its own, and when it doesn't, guilt appears. Because if you have everything, why the hell do you feel like this? Why are you sad if the world hasn't knocked you down? Why does it feel dramatic, exaggerated, ungrateful? And this is exactly the point where many people give up on themselves, because they begin to believe they have no right to suffer. They start thinking their pain is invalid, that they're just spoiled or simply bored. And the more you try to convince yourself of that, the more disconnected from yourself you become. You don't understand what's happening inside you, but you know something is wrong. Yet since it has no name, you keep ignoring it. You push through, pretending everything is fine because, apparently, it is. And meanwhile, that nameless sadness takes root. It gains weight. It takes up space inside you like a forgotten suitcase in the corner of the room, one no one knows who it belongs to, but it's there, blocking the way. And each time you trip over it, you pretend it was nothing. There is a kind of pain that doesn't come from what happened, but from what didn't. It's not the obvious trauma, the devastating loss, or the irreparable fight. It's the not feeling, the not recognizing yourself. It's the absence of that spark in your eyes, the smile that shows up only because it's supposed to, the body that's present while the soul is absent. And you start to wonder if you're broken, if there's something wrong with you because you can't enjoy what you have. And that doubt, that insecurity, that silent self-judgment, those are more poisonous than the sadness itself, because they invalidate what you feel, and no one can heal what they don't allow themselves to feel. No one can care for themselves while trying to pretend they're not unwell. Sadness, without an apparent cause, is often the muffled cry of something deeper. It could be emotional fatigue, emotional burnout, an ungrieved loss, or a life that has lost its meaning. And just because you can't explain the pain doesn't mean it isn't real. Suffering doesn't need a justification to be valid. It only needs to be heard, because even when everything is going well, there can still be something inside you crying for help. And the first step isn't to fix it, it's to recognize it, to look within with courage and say, maybe I'm hurting even if I don't exactly know why. And that's okay. I can feel this. I deserve to understand this. I have the right to listen to myself. You get dressed, reply to messages, handle what needs to be done, meet your deadlines. You go to the market, pay your bills, greet the doorman, maybe even post a selfie with a grateful caption. And on the outside, everything seems fine. You look okay, you're functioning, life goes on. But no one notices, not even you sometimes, that everything is happening on autopilot, that your routine has become a performance. That deep down, the feeling is one of merely surviving, not living. You do everything that needs to be done, but you do it like someone holding their breath, like someone swimming in a deep pool without knowing where the edge is. Functionality becomes a mask, and your collapse begins quietly, hidden behind completed tasks. This is one of the most treacherous traps of modern emotional distress. We've been taught that being okay means getting things done. That being healthy means keeping a full schedule, checking off tasks, not stopping. And under this logic, if you're still functioning, you must be fine. But human emotions don't follow spreadsheets. They don't stick to calendars. They don't respond to productivity with gratitude. The body may keep operating like a machine, but the soul might have already collapsed. The world only sees what you deliver, not what you feel. And when everything around you validates this perfect performance, the inner suffering gets smothered by your efficiency. You stop listening to yourself. You stop asking what you truly feel because there's no time, because there's more to do, because this will pass, and deep down because you're scared of what you might find. This kind of functional routine is dangerous because it legitimizes disconnection. The person keeps producing, communicating, showing up, and no one notices they're falling apart. Sometimes not even they do. Because if the world keeps spinning, that must mean everything's okay, right? Wrong. Pain doesn't vanish just because you're busy. Emptiness doesn't go away because your schedule is full. Sadness doesn't take time off just because you're still delivering results. At some point the bill comes due, and it might show up as a panic attack, emotional burnout, a loss of purpose, or that haunting sense that life has lost its color and no one noticed. And then you catch yourself thinking, but why do I feel like this? I'm working. I'm hanging out with friends. I'm doing everything right. Yes, you are. But the real question is, are you feeling alive in that process? Or are you just reacting to stimuli, to schedules, to everyone else's expectations? Because existing is one thing. Inhabiting your own life with presence is another. And it's very easy to confuse the two when everything seems normal. When you're overly functional, the world stops asking questions, and that's where the danger lies. Because sometimes it's in the silence of others that we learn to silence ourselves. And when you mute your own pain for too long, it starts to scream in other ways. The truth is, not all pain needs to knock you down to be real. Not all suffering needs to be paralyzing. There are collapses that happen while standing. People falling apart while they laugh. People drowning while answering emails. People screaming inside while cooking, working, driving. And what hurts the most in those moments isn't even the pain. It's the loneliness. It's realizing that no one noticed. That everyone thinks you're fine. That you're the strong one, you're the light of the group. The mature one, you're the grounded one. And you start to believe that showing vulnerability would betray that image. That asking for help would be drama. That slowing down would be weakness. But eventually the body asks for air. The soul asks for rest. And you have to choose. Keep pretending everything is normal, or listen to what's trying to save you. Because sometimes it's not your life that's broken. It's the way you stopped inhabiting it. And as long as you keep functioning without feeling, you'll keep suffocating the only thing that can truly heal you. The emotional truth you've been hiding, even from yourself. You catch yourself feeling sad and immediately scold yourself, but why am I like this? There are people starving. There's war. Some have lost everything. I should be grateful. And just like that, with one automatic and seemingly noble sentence, you bury your own pain. You convince yourself that suffering is a privilege, that only those going through visible tragedies are allowed to complain. That feeling bad when you have everything is ingratitude, selfishness, or just boredom. And with that you begin building a gap between what you feel and what you allow yourself to feel. Because now, on top of sadness, you carry the guilt of feeling it. A double suffering, emotional pain, and the shame of feeling it without a valid excuse. This is the psychological prison of those who constantly compare themselves to the suffering of others, as if there were a hierarchy of pain where only great traumas deserve to be heard and welcomed, where having a home, food, and affection disqualifies you from being unwell. But the truth is, pain isn't measured in catastrophes. It's measured in emotional intensity, in how deeply what's missing or hurting inside of you is affecting your ability to exist with lightness. And that doesn't depend on the size of the tragedy. It depends on your story, on what's been bottled up, on what was never named, on what you had to swallow with a smile because it wasn't a big deal. That's the invisible place where silent suffering grows, because no one looks at it, not even you. And the cruelest part is that this emotional invalidation often starts early. Way back when you heard, other people have it worse, you should be thankful, and you learned to silence your discomfort, your pain, your loneliness, your frustration. You learned that showing sadness was being ungrateful, that feeling too much was weakness, that complaining was wrong. And now as an adult, every time you feel an inexplicable ache, an existential fatigue, a sudden urge to cry without knowing why, you still censor yourself. You still repress it. You still tell yourself, there's no reason. But there is. The reason is that you have a soul, an inner world that doesn't fit within the metrics of the external world, and it needs to breathe. Denying your pain because it's not that big, is like refusing a glass of water because others are dying of thirst. You don't fix the world's pain by erasing your own. On the contrary, when you welcome your suffering, you become more capable of holding someone else's. Because now you know what it feels like to be there. Deep down, the problem isn't the sadness itself. It's the judgment it receives, the demand that it must be justified with a tragic backstory, as if only pain with a resume could be legitimate, as if you had to bleed on the outside to validate what's bleeding on the inside. And so, out of fear of seeming weak, spoiled, or ungrateful, you shut down. You pretend to be fine. You smile. You say, "I'm okay." And the more you deny it, the more that pain grows in the dark, because what's unseen becomes a symptom. It turns into apathy, irritation, insomnia, disconnection, and the more functional you are, the less people notice. And the less they notice, the more alone you feel. And in that vicious cycle, you start to believe you don't have the right to be helped, that you don't deserve care, that your pain is too small to bother anyone. But it's not. No pain is too small if it's making you suffer. No sadness is silly if it's stealing your will to live. You don't have to be in ruins to ask for help. You don't have to wait for everything to collapse before allowing yourself to feel. Your pain is valid, even without tragedy, even without a clear cause, because it belongs to your inner world, and only you know it, only you feel it, and only you can choose to stop comparing yourself to the world's chaos so you can finally take care of the chaos inside you. Silent, but real. You're not alone. There are people around you, people who message you on WhatsApp, who like your photos, who invite you out, people who, from the outside, would say you have a solid support network. And still, there are days when the silence inside you is deafening. You feel isolated in the midst of a crowd, a stranger among friends, a present body with a drifting soul, and the most distressing part, you can't explain it. Because how do you say you feel lonely when you're seemingly surrounded by affection? How do you give voice to a loneliness that has no shape, no reason, no clear absence? That's emotional loneliness, the kind that isn't solved by physical presence, but by real connection. It's being with people and yet feeling unseen, feeling like no one really notices what's happening inside you, because you've learned to hide it, to make jokes, to keep things light, to look busy, to say "I'm fine" so naturally that even you start to believe it. But you're not, and you know it, because when the bedroom door closes, the emptiness returns, the mask slips, the presence vanishes, and what remains is the silence, the one you even hide from yourself. And what makes this crowd-filled loneliness worse is the guilt it generates. You think, how can I feel this way if I have friends, if I have people I can count on? But true connection isn't measured by how many contacts you have. It's measured by depth, by how much space there is to be heard, by emotional presence. And sometimes, no matter how surrounded you are, no one really listens, because no one knows what you're hiding, and you don't know how to say it, and maybe deep down, you believe you're not even allowed to, that your pain is an inconvenience, that it would worry people unnecessarily, that opening up would be an unnecessary exposure. So you choose silence, and silence becomes your language. You talk about everything, except what really matters. You share memes, news, plans, but you keep the essential locked away. That thing stuck in your chest, that thing that only shows up late at night when everything goes quiet, when the mask slips and the soul whispers, "I wish someone saw me," not with their eyes, but with their listening. Someone who notices beyond the smile, beyond the productivity, beyond the automatic replies. Someone who says, "I see that something's there, and I'm staying." But while that person doesn't show up, you need to see yourself, to hear yourself. Because sometimes, the loudest silence isn't what comes from outside. It's the one you impose on yourself, the one that stops you from naming what you feel, from acknowledging your vulnerability, from allowing yourself to break. Emotional loneliness begins when you abandon yourself, when, to maintain the illusion of normality, you shut down your inner radar and you start existing only as a reflection of others' expectations. But no amount of external company fills the hole left by internal absence. And no matter how many try to convince you that you have everything, you know something's missing. You're missing. What's missing is your truth, spoken without fear. What's missing is space to feel without explaining. What's missing is freedom to admit that, even surrounded, you're tired. And that's not drama, it's not weakness, it's human. Because connection isn't about being together, it's about being touched. And if no one touches you on the inside, it doesn't matter how many stand around you. And maybe the bravest act right now is this: to break the silence. To tell yourself with brutal honesty, I'm here, but I feel far. I'm with everyone, but I'm alone. And allow that recognition to be the beginning of your reconnection with yourself. You're fully aware of everything you've achieved. You know how hard you've fought. You recognize that things could be much worse, and you're not blind to your own privileges. On the contrary, you constantly remind yourself of them. Yet still, something inside you hurts. Still, sadness comes. The emptiness appears. Apathy settles in. And when that happens, the first thought that hits is an inner accusation. You should be grateful, not complaining. As if feeling bad were a betrayal. As if being sad was spitting on the plate you've eaten from. And little by little, you start confusing suffering with ingratitude. You begin to believe that being sad makes you ungrateful, so you go silent. You pretend you're fine. You bury what you feel, as if suffering cancels out gratitude. But that isn't true, because being grateful and being unwell are not opposites. They are emotions that can coexist in the same body. You can be thankful for life and still feel pain. You can acknowledge all the good things you have and still be emotionally exhausted. The problem is that society has built a toxic narrative around mandatory gratitude, a mantra of positivity that ignores the complexity of human experience. In that environment, any sign of sadness is seen as complaining. Any deeper sigh is read as dissatisfaction. Any emotional pause becomes a weakness, and so you learn to stay quiet, to censor yourself, to dress up what you feel with a forced layer of optimism. But the truth is that pain doesn't stop existing just because you're aware of your privileges. Pain doesn't follow logic. It comes from within. It arises from stories, absences, invisible pressures, and wounds no one sees. You might have everything sorted out on the surface and still have unresolved things inside. And when you deny that in the name of gratitude, you're not being fair to yourself. You're being cruel. You're telling yourself you can only suffer if everything's in ruins, that you can only feel pain if it's dramatic, visible, undeniable. But the most dangerous suffering is precisely the one no one sees, the one too silent to move others, but strong enough to paralyze you from within. And when you try to fill that discomfort with empty phrases, others have it worse. Why, at least you're healthy. Be thankful you have a job. What you're really doing is erasing your own pain. You're telling yourself that what you feel doesn't matter, that it isn't valid, that it isn't enough. And this kind of self-invalidation drains your vitality. It turns your life into a sequence of emotional obligations. You feel pressured to be okay, to smile, to be grateful. And in the process, you forget that true gratitude doesn't come from repression. It comes from the freedom to feel everything, even sadness. You don't need to hate yourself for feeling bad. You don't need to judge yourself for having hard days. Life isn't a straight line of constant gratitude. It's a tangle of conflicting emotions. You can absolutely be thankful for what you have and still cry at night. You can have a job, a home, your health, and still feel like something's missing. You can love the people around you and still feel alone. That doesn't make you ungrateful. It makes you human, a being who feels, who suffers, who sometimes gets lost. And that's okay. Gratitude is not the same as denial. It's not emotional anesthesia. Real gratitude happens when you're able to look at everything, including your pain, and still choose to go on. And going on doesn't mean pretending everything's okay. It means recognizing that it's not always okay, and still choosing to show up for yourself. That's the true act of gratitude, not silencing what you feel, but allowing yourself to feel without guilt. You wake up tired, even after a full night of sleep. You feel aches you can't explain, a constant tension in your shoulders, a pressure in your chest, a knot in your stomach. Sometimes it's insomnia that comes out of nowhere. Other times, it's a sudden urge to cry without reason, or that strange forgetfulness, as if your mind were foggy, and you try to explain it logically. It's just stress. Maybe it's the coffee. I'm getting older. But deep down, you know something's there. Your body is trying to say what you don't want to hear, because before any emotional breakdown, the first to scream is the body, and most of the time it screams quietly, just enough to see if you're listening. That's how nameless distress begins to show itself. Not with a big explosion, but with a persistent noise, a subtle discomfort, a feeling that something's not right. And because there's no clear explanation, you ignore it. Take some pills, schedule a general checkup, drink more coffee, turn up the volume of your day, until one day your body stops, and you finally realize it had been screaming for a long time. You just didn't want to hear it. When the body isn't heard, it gets sick. And when you force yourself to keep functioning under emotional exhaustion, it finds a way to stop you. Sometimes with pain, sometimes with breakdowns, sometimes with a total system shutdown. The truth is, the body feels before the mind understands. It picks up on what hasn't been said. It senses the overload. It reacts to the silence you impose on your emotions. And if you keep hiding what you feel, your body will bring it out. It will turn sadness into chronic fatigue, anxiety into heart palpitations, apathy into diffuse pain. It will demand attention the only way it can, through somatization. And no, this isn't all in your head. It's your body trying to save your soul, trying to protect you from total disconnection with yourself. Because when you stop feeling, the body starts suffering in your place. And the cruelest part is that often you don't have time or internal permission to stop and listen. You think, I can't afford that right now. And you keep going. You push through, delay the listening, neglect your own well-being, until your body knocks you down, forces you to rest, imposes the pause. And there, in the midst of exhaustion, you realize your body knew what was happening long before you admitted it. Because it doesn't lie. It feels. It records. It expresses what the mind tries to censor. Learning to listen to the body is an act of emotional maturity. It's understanding that it's not an obstacle, it's an ally. That it's not against you when it gets sick, it's trying to save you. That every signal is an invitation to look inward, to ask, what's hurting inside me that I still haven't named? It might be emotional fatigue, it might be swallowed frustration, it might be the absence of meaning screaming in silence. But whatever it is, it's there. And if you listen sincerely, you'll realize the body doesn't want to stop you. It wants to bring you back to yourself. And the question that remains is, how long will you force this body to carry an emotional load that's crying for help? How long will you treat your symptoms as enemies instead of messages? How long will you pretend everything is fine while your body says it's not? The path to healing begins when you stop betraying yourself in the name of productivity. When you understand that being alive is not just functioning, it's feeling whole. And for that, you must listen to what your body is trying to say before it has to scream louder. You try to understand. You make mental lists. Go over what's happened in recent days. Check if you forgot something important. Try to find a reason, an explanation, a concrete cause for this discomfort. Is it lack of sleep? Is it some kind of emotional need? Is it PMS, seasonal change, boredom, fatigue? You analyze yourself, question yourself, rationalize constantly. And still, nothing. No satisfying conclusion. No answer that explains what you feel. Just this emptiness that remains even after all your effort to decode it. Like a clean room with no mess, but where the light won't turn on. And you get trapped in this anguish. The body warns that something's wrong, but the mind can't find the cause. And so, because you don't understand, you invalidate the feeling, as if you're only allowed to feel what can be explained. But that's one of the biggest emotional misconceptions we learn, that everything we feel must make sense, that all suffering must come with a caption, that only pain that can be proven, described, or argued is legitimate. But our inner life doesn't follow the logic of reason. It speaks another language. It's symbolic, subjective, instinctive. And many times, what you're feeling isn't about what happened yesterday. It's about everything you've been carrying for years. It's about wounds you've learned to ignore, emotions you've swallowed, desires you've suppressed to fit in. And this emptiness is the echo of all that. It's the reflection of a life that may look balanced on the outside, but is disconnected on the inside. You can have success, stability, affection, and still feel like something's missing, because what's missing isn't always visible. Sometimes it's a sense of belonging. Sometimes it's emotional freedom. Sometimes it's space to be who you truly are, without performing, without expectation, without playing a role. And that can't be solved with logic. There's no point in looking for a linear answer to an existential issue, because it's not about understanding, it's about listening. And true listening requires pause, requires silence, requires presence, things that rationalization can't provide. The mind tries to solve. The heart just wants to be seen. And when you insist on rationalizing everything, you end up moving further away from yourself, because you turn your pain into a puzzle to be solved instead of an experience to be embraced. And each time you demand an explanation that doesn't come, you feel even more frustrated, as if something were wrong with you, as if you were making things up, being too sensitive, weak. And so, beyond suffering, you feel guilty. You correct yourself. You push yourself, all to avoid appearing vulnerable, all to avoid facing the only truth that matters. You are unwell, and that's enough. You don't have to justify it. There's an invisible arrogance in trying to explain everything with the mind, a fear disguised as control. Because when you understand, you think you can fix it. But when you don't, you have to feel it. And feeling hurts. Feeling throws you off. Feeling demands emotional humility. That's why logic is so seductive. It gives the illusion of safety. But no logic in the world replaces the courage it takes to face what hurts, to allow yourself to cry even if you don't know why, to embrace yourself, even if you have no clear answer, because some pain doesn't need to be understood, it needs to be lived. That's the only way it can finally pass. Emptiness doesn't go away with cliches, quick diagnoses, or rational solutions. It begins to dissolve when you allow yourself to simply exist, even messy, even incomplete, even without knowing exactly what you're feeling, because healing doesn't come from the right answer. It comes from the encounter with your own truth, even when that truth doesn't make any sense at all. You're not just sad, you're ashamed for being sad, because at some point in your story, maybe in childhood, maybe just yesterday while scrolling your feed, you were taught that being happy is a duty, that if you have health, a job, and people around you, you should be fine, that life is a line of accomplishments, and every achievement demands a smile. And if by any chance you feel like crying on the day of your promotion, or isolating yourself in the middle of a party, or simply existing with no energy, then something must be deeply wrong with you. That's the weight of happiness as an imposition, an invisible but constant pressure that turns legitimate sadness into a character flaw. That's where silent emotional pressure begins. You don't just suffer, you suffer for suffering, as if your pain were a failure, as if life demanded that even in silence you still had to smile. And if you can't, you start to feel out of place, as if everyone else had understood a secret you missed, as if there were a manual for joy circulating out there, just not in your hands. Happiness, which should be an internal experience, becomes a social model, an aesthetic standard, a daily performance, and you chase after this ideal state like someone running toward an unreachable sunset. And the more you try, the further away it feels. This pressure intensifies because it's silent. No one explicitly forces you to be happy, but the whole environment nudges you toward it. The smiles on social media, the motivational quotes, the endless comparisons, the toxic positivity disguised as inspiration. And when you can't keep up with it, you withdraw, you fall silent. You blame yourself, as if your sadness were a failure of effort, as if it were your personal responsibility to fix what you feel, quickly, quietly, without bothering anyone. And in that process, you drift further from yourself, because you start pretending, performing, smiling while suffocating, and that dissonance between what you feel and what you show eats you up inside, slowly. Happiness has become a permanent goal, a state that must be maintained, validated, and displayed. But the truth is, real happiness is a floating state. It isn't fixed, it isn't constant, it isn't mandatory. You can live incredible moments and still feel an inexplicable emptiness. You can love your family, your job, your routine, and still feel like something's missing. That's not a defect, that's humanity, that's emotional complexity. The problem is that you don't see that reflected around you, because the world doesn't talk about legitimate sadness. It only shows the happy fragments. And when you feel different, you think the problem is you, but it's not. The problem is the myth of mandatory happiness. Feeling down amidst good things doesn't make you ungrateful. It makes you alive. Because living is feeling. And feeling includes shadow, includes exhaustion, includes bad days in good lives. You don't need to hide your sadness to maintain the image of a perfect life. You shouldn't force yourself to smile while bleeding inside. Happiness is not a standard to be followed. It's a flicker to be felt. And when you stop forcing yourself to be okay all the time, you begin to truly live. Because now, you don't need to pretend anymore. You can simply be. And sometimes being means crying. It means silence. It means stopping. And all of that is part of life too. True happiness only blooms when you stop trying to look happy. It grows in the soil of authenticity. When you allow yourself to feel what you feel, without shame, without fear, without performance. And if today what you feel is sadness, emptiness, or exhaustion, then honor that. Listen to it. Because maybe your soul is just asking for a break. From the pressure of having to seem okay, you smile, you make jokes, and stick to your routine, post stories, pretend it's all light. And on the outside, everything seems absolutely normal. No one suspects, no one asks, no one notices. Because you're good at this, at seeming fine, at seeming whole, at seeming strong, but keeping up this performance comes at a high price. Because pretending to be okay when everything inside you is falling apart is exhausting. It's like trying to hold up a castle with your bare hands while everything inside is crumbling. And the cruelest part is that the world applauds you for it, because no one sees the pain you disguise too well. There is a deep loneliness in being functional, while your heart is in ruins. You work, deliver, socialize, show up, but every gesture is calculated down to the millimeter to avoid raising suspicion. You don't want to worry anyone, don't want to seem fragile, don't want to disappoint, so you hold it in, swallow it, perform, until that becomes your default mode. You get used to smiling without being happy, saying, "I'm fine," when nothing inside makes sense, repeating, "It's just tiredness," when what you really feel is a void where joy used to be. And the saddest part is that often, no one notices, not out of lack of love, but because you've become a master at hiding, because you've learned that showing pain is weakness, that you can't fall apart, that you must handle everything, that you have to be strong all the time. And in trying to protect others from your pain, you abandon yourself. You reject yourself. You dim your light. You ignore your own signs just to keep up the image that everything's under control. But control isn't healing, and forced normalcy is a form of self-harm. Pretending to be okay when you're not creates a gap between who you are and who you pretend to be. And living in that gap consumes you, drains you, wears you down, because each day you must emotionally reinvent yourself just to keep going. And when, for any reason, you slip, when you can't smile, when the exhaustion leaks through, when your eyes give you away, fear sets in. Fear of being found out. Fear of losing people's admiration. Fear of being seen as weak. So you reinforce the mask, the performance, the persona, until even you can't tell where the pretending ends and the truth begins. But there comes a time when your body can't take it anymore, when your emotions overflow, when your soul cries out for help. And at that point, pretending is no longer an option, because pain that's denied doesn't disappear, it builds, and when it explodes, it chooses no time or place. That's why pretending to be fine is a dangerous game, because there's nothing crueler than convincing yourself you're not allowed to be who you are, that you're not allowed to feel what you feel, that you're not allowed to fall apart. And that's what keeps so many people trapped in the cycle of disconnection, the fear of being seen in pieces. But it's important to remember, vulnerability is not shame, it's courage. Showing that you're not okay doesn't make you less worthy, it makes you human. And more than that, it makes you free. Because as long as you keep pretending, you're imprisoned, trapped in the need to appear okay, to function, to please. And no healing can come from a lie. Healing comes from the encounter, with what is, with what hurts, with what's begging for care inside you. And that encounter only happens when you stop performing and start listening to yourself. Because the only thing more exhausting than being unwell is pretending all the time that you're not. You're standing, you walk, talk, work, meet deadlines. Your body is there operating as it should. You manage to get out of bed, get dressed, make it through the day. But something inside you is out of place. It's not physical pain, it's not something that shows up on a medical exam. It's more subtle and at the same time devastating. It's as if your soul has fallen asleep, as if a part of you quietly slipped away, while the rest stayed behind just to keep the machine running. The body survives, the soul does not, and this dissociation eats away at you little by little, without anyone noticing. It's a strange feeling, hard to explain, as if there's a delay between what you live and what you feel. You go places, take part in conversations, respond correctly, but inside, you're distant. There's no excitement, no color, no presence. Life starts to feel like a movie, and you're watching your own story as if it belongs to someone else. And the most distressing part is that often you don't even realize it at first, because everything is still functioning. Productivity continues. The routine moves forward, but something has been lost. The joy of existing, the sparkle in your eyes, the warmth of belonging to yourself. When the soul is unwell, the signs are silent. You start avoiding things that once excited you. You begin to invent excuses not to go out. You get irritated by things that used to feel neutral. You start feeling out of place in your own spaces. Sometimes you feel like disappearing, not out of drama, but out of exhaustion. Not tired of life, but tired of living like this. Disconnected, on autopilot, numb. Because being alive isn't just about breathing, it's about feeling, about being moved, about recognizing yourself in your own path. And when you no longer feel part of your own life, it's your soul crying out for help. This disconnection has a name, it has weight, and it has consequences. Because when you ignore the soul, it gets sick. And when it gets sick, everything around you loses meaning. Bonds go cold. Days blur together. Goals lose their purpose. You're still able to go on fine, but you no longer know why. It's like running on a treadmill. You get tired, but you're not getting anywhere. And that exhaustion turns into something deeper, a kind of pain with no exact location, yet present everywhere. An existential ache that suffocates even when there's no clear reason. And this is where many people get lost. Because since everything seems normal, no one understands. Not even you. You think you're just tired, that you need a break, that it's just a phase, and maybe it is, but often it's more than that. It's a soul wounded by lack of listening, of presence, of truth. A soul silenced so many times that now it doesn't know how to speak. A soul that needs to be rescued gently, patiently, slowly, not with quick fixes or shallow advice, but through a deep reunion with who you are. On the inside, the body can endure a lot, but it cannot replace the soul. It can carry you anywhere, but without the fuel of what you feel, believe, and desire, it merely survives. And surviving for too long kills in silence. That's why you must pause, listen, feel, not to fix everything at once, but to begin returning. Returning inward, returning to what you left behind, returning to live with presence. Because the soul gets sick when you abandon yourself. And healing begins when you say, enough. I don't want to just survive. I want to live, truly live. You don't allow yourself to break. Don't allow yourself to fall. Don't allow yourself to make mistakes. And above all, you don't allow yourself to feel. Because you learned that too much emotion gets in the way, that sensitivity is weakness, that falling apart is a sign of losing control. So instead of comforting yourself, you pressure yourself. Instead of crying, you correct yourself. Instead of saying, I'm not okay, you say, this will pass. And so you start stacking up unprocessed emotions like unfinished tasks you'd rather ignore. But they don't go away. They stay there, waiting for the right moment to overflow. Because when emotional overdemand becomes the rule, suffering stops being a natural process and becomes a personal failure. You convince yourself that you can't afford to feel sad, that everything is going too well to feel bad, that people depend on you, that if you fall, everything collapses. And so you turn self-care into duty, pain into a goal, emotion into performance, as if there were a deadline to heal, as if every feeling had to be justified by logic, productivity, or coherence. And in that process, you dehumanize yourself. You become a manager of your own pain, an inspector of your own emotions, trying to keep everything under control when what you really need is to let it fall apart, to let it out, to stop controlling. This silent pressure comes disguised as strength. I can handle it. I'm resilient. I've been through worse. But behind those phrases lives a deep fear, the fear of losing control, of disappointing others, of being seen as weak. And because of that fear, you build armor, a layer of self-control that looks like protection, but actually isolates you, keeps you from being truly seen, keeps you from asking for help. Because for someone who demands so much of themselves, asking for help feels like failure, like defeat, when in truth it's courage, it's maturity, it's life pounding in your chest saying, I can't keep pretending anymore. You demand emotional perfection from yourself that you don't demand from anyone else. You look at others with compassion, but treat yourself with harshness. You accept other people's fatigue, but call yours laziness. You understand their pain, but judge your own. And that's not strength, that's exhaustion in disguise. It's emotional survival, a desperate attempt to keep functioning, even when everything inside is begging for a pause, a hug, a safe space to fall apart without fear. This emotional overdemand often comes from a childhood where you had to grow up too soon, where feeling wasn't safe, where crying was punished, where being vulnerable was dangerous, so you learned to be strong and never looked back. Never allowed yourself to be small again. Never gave yourself the right to simply exist without having to hold everything together. But real strength isn't in always enduring. It's in knowing when to stop, when to rest, when to let it hurt. Because feeling isn't weakness, it's life. You don't need to heal in silence. You don't need to get it right all the time. You don't need to be okay every day. You can fail, you can fall apart. You can feel anger, sadness, fear. You can contradict yourself. You can get lost. You are human. And being human doesn't go with perfection. It goes with truth. And maybe what's hurting so much right now isn't just what you feel, but what you haven't allowed yourself to feel because of this cruel pressure. So let go. Make space. Allow it. Because your pain doesn't need permission to exist, but you need permission to feel it. So you can finally be free. You feel a tightness, a discomfort, a recurring sadness that has no clear explanation. And when you try to find the reason, you can't. There was no devastating event, no specific tragedy, no big scene of pain you can point to and say, that's where it all started. And because of that, you doubt yourself. You think you're overreacting, that you don't have a reason to feel this bad. But what you're feeling is real, and it may be the result of something much deeper and more subtle. Invisible trauma, the kind that has no name, no marked date, no appearance in old photos or medical records, but it silently shaped everything you are. There's a kind of trauma that isn't built in a single moment, but in small, constant repetitions, a disapproving look, withheld affection, a need that went unmet, a childhood where you had to swallow your tears, fend for yourself, be strong too soon. These experiences isolated may seem ordinary, but together they create a pattern, the belief that you're not allowed to feel, not allowed to fail, not allowed to be comforted. And that pattern gets internalized until it becomes identity. You grow up believing your value lies in handling it, in not being a burden, in being mature, and in doing so, you abandon parts of yourself that never came back. These invisible traumas are tricky because they coexist with denial. You think, my parents did the best they could, and maybe they did, but that doesn't erase the impact of what was missing, of what silently hurt, of what you felt, even if no one else noticed. Because trauma isn't only about what happened, it's also about what didn't happen, the affection that never came, the protection that wasn't there, the hug that was denied when you needed it most, and above all, the emotional listening that never occurred. All of this leaves invisible scars, and sooner or later those scars demand to be seen. You don't need to have lived through major drama to carry wounds. You didn't need to be beaten, yelled at, or run away from home. Sometimes everything happened quietly, in a seemingly functional home, and yet you weren't emotionally nourished. That leaves gaps, wounds that don't bleed on the outside, but fester within. They become repetitive patterns, relationships where you erase yourself, a constant fear of rejection, inability to relax, difficulty trusting, crushing self-criticism. All of it might have been born back when you learned that being your true self wasn't safe, that you had to adapt to survive emotionally. And now, as an adult, you live with the consequences without fully knowing why. You feel disconnected, lost, sad for no reason, sometimes ashamed for feeling what you feel, thinking you're being dramatic, but you're not. What you're really doing is reconnecting with parts of yourself that were frozen, that got stuck back when feeling was dangerous. And it's hard, because those parts don't return with logic, they don't come back with speeches, they return with pain, with fear, with confusion, with resistance, because for years they were taught to be quiet. Acknowledging invisible trauma isn't about blaming anyone. It's about liberation. It's about allowing your story to be told with honesty. It's about giving voice to what you've always felt, but never had space to express. Because only then can you truly comfort yourself. Only then can you stop repeating the same patterns, stop carrying weights that were never yours, stop demanding a strength that no child should ever have to possess. You have the right to look back and say, it was missing, it hurt, it affected me, and from that point begin writing a different story. One where you no longer need to pretend it doesn't hurt. One where you can finally exist fully, including the parts no one ever saw. You look at your life and technically, everything happened as it should. You studied, worked, had relationships, built bonds, moved forward. And yet, something feels missing. A strange emptiness, a kind of longing for something you never lived. A sense that you spent your life adapting, performing, surviving, but not truly living. And this feeling, even if hard to name, carries an immense weight, because without realizing it, you are grieving. Grieving all the versions of yourself that never got to exist. Grieving everything you never were, everything you never felt, everything you never lived, because deep down, there was never space to just be you. This kind of grief is sneaky. It doesn't come with obvious tears or clear rituals. It comes as chronic melancholy, a constant lack of motivation, a persistent difficulty in feeling present. You may be surrounded by people, achieving goals, checking off accomplishments, and still feel like you're not really there, like you're acting in a script you didn't write. And sometimes that script was handed to you far too early, when you had to be too strong, too responsible, too adult, when your spontaneity was traded for efficiency, when your desires were silenced by the need to please, and without realizing it, you buried the most alive part of you, the freedom to be who you are. And now what hurts isn't what happened, it's what never did. It's the affection you never received in the way you needed, the peace you never experienced because you were always on alert, the love you never felt because you were too busy trying to earn it. This kind of pain doesn't show up in photos. It's not in the statistics, but it eats away at you from the inside, because grieving something without memories is hard. Crying for what never existed but should have is hard. And this absence has no face. It shows up as a dull gaze, a lack of enthusiasm, a lack of belonging. And when you try to talk about it, few people understand. They say you have everything, that your life is great, that you've achieved so much. And so you stay quiet, because it's not about accomplishments, it's about connection, about truly feeling present in your own life and not just playing a role. It's about being whole, without censorship, about existing without needing to fit in. And when this grief is not acknowledged, it turns into symptoms. It becomes a tired body, silent breakdowns, unexplained apathy. This lingering question, is this all there is? But this grief can also be a portal, a call to reclaim what was left behind, an invitation to honor the child who never played, the teenager who never expressed themselves, the adult who never allowed themselves to fail, not to relive the past, but to free the future, to give your story a new possibility, for it to finally become yours, genuine, felt. Because while you don't acknowledge what was never lived, you stay trapped trying to fill a void that can't be solved with goals or achievements. It can only be healed with truth. You have the right to grieve for everything that didn't happen. You have the right to look back and say, something was missing. Not to stay stuck in pain, but to be released from it. Because once you recognize that grief, something inside you begins to return. The soul understands that it's finally been seen, that it no longer has to hide. And that's where reconnection begins, not with an idealized past, but with a possible present, one where you can now choose to live, not like before, but like never before. You try to justify, try to explain, try to convince yourself and others that what you feel makes sense, that there's a plausible, concrete, logical, measurable reason behind it. And when you can't find one, doubt creeps in. Am I overreacting? Is this just weakness? Am I being too dramatic? But the truth is simple, raw, and powerful. You're suffering, and that is enough. Because suffering by itself is worthy of attention. It doesn't need a resume. It doesn't need a signed tragedy. It doesn't need to be loud or dramatic. It only needs to be acknowledged. Because every pain ignored becomes something bigger. Every pain that's not validated turns into silence, and every silence one day becomes a symptom. You don't have to compete with the world's pain to justify your own. You don't need to minimize what you feel just because someone else is going through something worse. That comparison only serves to silence you, to keep you functional, to convince you that your suffering doesn't deserve space. But it does, because it's there. It exists. It moves through you. It consumes you. And you have the right to feel it without guilt, without fear, without having to explain. What you feel is valid simply because you feel it. That's not self-indulgence. That's emotional truth. That's being honest with yourself. Denying what you feel doesn't make you stronger. It only makes you more distant from yourself. Because when you censor yourself, when you force yourself to be okay, when you try to rationalize what is visceral, you disconnect. You betray yourself. You become a stranger inside your own body. And living like that in conflict with your own emotions is a silent torture, a kind of loneliness that no company can fix, because it's not about being with others. It's about being with yourself again. About allowing yourself to exist without always needing to be okay. You can feel sad without an acceptable reason. You can feel anxious even when surrounded by love. You can feel lost even with everything in its place. Because what you feel doesn't follow logic. It follows depth. And the depth of pain isn't measured by how life looks on the outside. Sometimes the deepest pain appears precisely when everything seems to be fine, because it's in that silence, in the absence of external chaos, that the internal storms find room to emerge. And if they're there, it's because they need to be heard. And here's the central point. You deserve care, not because your pain is worse than anyone else's, not because you are broken, but because you are human. And being human is to feel, to waver, to get lost, to emotionally fall apart, to ask for help. You don't need to wait for everything to collapse to allow yourself to be cared for. You don't need to hit rock bottom to seek support. You can simply say, "I'm not okay." And that alone is already an act of courage, an act of being. Your suffering doesn't need to be validated by anyone else, because it's you who lives with it. You who carry the weight on your back, the pressure in your chest, the emptiness in the middle of the night. And if it hurts, then it's real. And if it's real, then it deserves attention. You are not weak for feeling, not ungrateful, not wrong. You are someone trying to live despite everything. And that in itself is huge. So today, maybe the most important step is not to explain anything, but to look at yourself with kindness and say, "I'm suffering." And that alone is reason enough to take care of myself. You've spent too much time staying silent, too much time pretending, too much time trying to convince the world and yourself that everything was fine. But your body can't take it anymore. Your soul no longer responds, and your heart, it still beats, but it beats tired. Because carrying the silence of suffering is like walking with stones on your chest, invisible to others, but heavy enough to sink you, little by little, from the inside. And there comes a point when you either speak or collapse. You either break the cycle of pretending or keep slowly fading away. And maybe, just maybe, today is the day you decide, enough. It's time to say, even with a trembling voice, that you are not okay, that it hurts, that it's heavy, that you are tired. Breaking the silence isn't about having the right words. It's not about making sense or being sure of what you feel. It's about making space, a safe space where you can finally exist without disguise, where you don't have to prove anything, where you can simply be. Because healing begins the moment you truly listen to yourself, when you stop running over your emotions with justifications, when you stop silencing yourself with "others have it worse." It's just a phase. This too shall pass. Sometimes what heals the most isn't a solution. It's a release, a cry that escapes. "I can't take this anymore," spoken out loud. A simple sentence, but one that cracks open the armor you've worn for years. Speaking about your pain is not weakness. It's resistance. It's breaking with an inner system that taught you to stay quiet, to swallow, to endure. And that break can start small, a message to someone you trust, a journal, a therapy session, a tearful voice note in the middle of the night. Because what matters is not the format, it's the gesture of breaking the chain of silence that keeps you trapped. Because while you don't listen to yourself, no one else can truly hear you. The first step to being held by another is holding yourself. And that step doesn't have to be huge, it just has to be honest. Ending the silence doesn't mean shouting, it means not hiding. It means having the courage to say you also need comfort, that you also have limits, that you also feel fear, And most of all, that you also deserve care. Because even if the world applauded you for being strong, the one who carries everything alone is not a hero. It's someone who never learned to be supported. And that can change. You can today choose to begin again. Choose to be seen. Choose to be heard. Choose to show yourself, not as someone who has all the answers, but as someone who carries painful questions and still wants to keep going. The beginning of the end of silence is also the beginning of reconnecting with yourself, with that part of you that was forgotten, muffled, neglected, that part that still knows what it means to feel, to live, to be genuinely moved. That part is still there, waiting for you to say, "You can come back. I won't silence you anymore." And when that happens and something shifts, the pain doesn't disappear overnight, but it changes places. It stops being a prison and becomes a bridge between who you were forced to be and who you truly are. And crossing that bridge may be the deepest act of self-love there is. You need to stop apologizing for not being okay. Stop justifying your tiredness, your sadness, your lack of energy. You need to understand, once and for all, that not being well is part of life. That no one lives in a permanent state of wholeness. That humans weren't born to operate like machines. And even if the world demands performance, productivity, and constant smiles, your soul has the right to pause, to fall apart, to breathe, to feel. Because being unwell is not a sign of failure, it's a sign of humanity. But for that, you need something almost no one taught you, giving yourself permission to not be okay. That permission doesn't come from others. Not from your therapist, your friends, or your family. It comes from you, it's internal. And that's why it's so difficult. Because inside you lives a critical voice, shaped by years of demands and comparison. A voice that says, you only have value if you're smiling, that you only deserve affection if you're cheerful, that you're only worthy if you're strong. But that voice is lying. It wasn't born with you. It was taught, repeated, until it felt like truth. But now you have the chance to rewrite that code, to say to that voice, today I won't listen to you, today I'll feel, today I'll be honest with myself. Allowing yourself to not be okay is revolutionary, because it breaks the emotional system of control and denial that you've lived under for so long. And at first it's scary, because you were conditioned not to stop, not to fail, not to cry in public, not to show weakness. But the more you repress, the more your body gets sick, the more your mind burns out, the more your soul goes quiet. That's why sometimes the greatest care isn't about fixing the pain, but simply allowing it to exist, without judgment, without correction, without a timer. You don't need to wake up smiling every day. You don't need to be optimistic when everything inside you is falling apart. You're allowed to have cloudy days, to cancel plans, to leave messages unanswered, to simply exist. That doesn't make you less. It doesn't diminish your worth. It makes you real. It brings you closer to yourself. Because when you allow yourself not to be okay, you make room for real well-being to arrive. Not the forced kind, just to keep up appearances, but the genuine kind. The one that is born when your soul feels safe, heard, and at home. That permission is the beginning of true self-care. Not the aesthetic kind, not candles and soft playlists, but the brave kind. The one that looks in the mirror and says, today I'm not okay, and that's okay, today I will honor that. This kind of care is rare, and that's why it's so transformative. Because when you welcome yourself like that, with truth, presence, and tenderness, something within you starts to reorganize. The pain might not go away instantly, but it settles. Because for the first time, it's not being denied. It's being seen. Giving yourself permission to not be okay is opening space for healing. It's saying, I'm not perfect, I can't handle everything, and that's okay. Because in that honest space, real lightness is born. The kind that doesn't depend on external circumstances. The kind that comes when you allow yourself to be whole, even on the days when everything is falling apart. And if today is one of those days, then allow it. Allow yourself to feel. Allow yourself to stop. Allow yourself to exist without pressure, because you're not less worthy for being unwell. You are precisely because of that, deeply human. There comes a moment when you realize you've spent your whole life putting yourself second, that you cared too much about not disappointing others, about pleasing, keeping everything under control, being strong, being useful. And in this quiet path of constant giving, you forgot yourself. You drifted away from who you are in the name of relationships, responsibilities, promises. And now something inside you begins to scream, "What about me? When will it be my turn? When do I choose myself? When do I become important to me?" Becoming important to yourself is not selfishness. It's rescue. It's a reunion with the emotional dignity you may never have learned to cultivate. Because often you were taught that self-care was weakness, that putting yourself first was arrogance, that thinking of yourself was a lack of love, and you believed it. You grew up thinking your worth depended on being essential to someone else, that your existence had to be useful, functional, convenient. And now, as an adult, you suffer every time you try to put yourself first, because it feels like betrayal, when in truth it's the first time you've been loyal to yourself. And being loyal to yourself hurts at first, because it forces you to break away from old versions. It forces you to reevaluate relationships. It forces you to set boundaries. It forces you to say no where you always said sure. But it's within that discomfort that rebirth begins. Because when you become important to yourself, you start making more intentional choices. You choose who deserves your energy. You choose what to silence and what to express. You stop begging for emotional crumbs and start demanding presence, reciprocity, truth. And all of that begins with one internal gesture, looking at yourself and saying, with firmness and tenderness, "I matter." Caring for yourself means listening to your limits. It means stopping the violence of a routine that exhausts you. It means stepping out of autopilot and asking, "What do I want? What makes me feel good? What do I need right now?" Simple questions, but they change everything, because they take you out of the role of spectator and put you back at the center of your own life. And that's where the magic happens. Because for the first time, you're not waiting for the world to save you. You're saving yourself. You're saying, "I can't control everything, but I can take care of myself." And that already changes everything. And maybe, right now, what you need most isn't answers. It's presence, your own presence, to feel held by yourself, to be the comfort you've always searched for, to be the hug no one gave you, to be the courage you lacked. When you become important to yourself, you understand you don't need permission to exist in truth anymore. You authorize yourself. You sustain yourself. You see yourself. And that changes absolutely everything. Because once you truly see yourself, you never abandon yourself again. Life changes when you stop asking for space and start taking your place. When you realize the world may never applaud you, but you can, and you should, and you deserve to, because there is no healing without ownership. And ownership begins like this: when, in the middle of the chaos, you take a deep breath and choose to take care of yourself. Choose to listen to yourself. Choose finally to be important to yourself, because no one can live your life for you, and no one can love you better than you. You find yourself exhausted, irritable for no reason, wanting to disappear, struggling to focus, to sleep, to feel joy in simple things. And then that automatic thought comes, "I'm weak. I'm being soft. I should be stronger." But what you're calling weakness is actually a plea. A deep, silent, urgent plea. Your soul is asking for help. It's tired of being ignored, tired of functioning without being heard, tired of carrying burdens that don't belong to it, tired of maintaining an image that no longer reflects who you are. And all this exhaustion you feel is not a flaw, it's a warning. Society taught us that weakness is crying, that weakness is being tired, that weakness is asking for help. And so you learned how to camouflage it, to smile when you wanted to collapse, to say "I'm fine" when you were on the edge of breaking down. And over time you became a master at pretending to be strong. But inside your body trembles, your chest tightens, your mind screams, because it's impossible to live in a state of emotional war without paying the price. And now what you call a breakdown might actually be your internal system trying to save you, to pull you back, to remind you that you're not a machine, that you weren't born to endure everything in silence. It's not weakness to need help. Weakness is refusing to feel, it's living numbed. It's staying on a path that's killing you just to keep up the image of being strong. That is self-betrayal, because true strength doesn't come from enduring everything. It comes from recognizing when you can't go on. It comes from allowing yourself to stop, to breathe, to ask for comfort, to say, I can't do this alone. That's real courage. Being honest with yourself. Admitting that behind all the efficiency, the good humor, the strength, there's someone quietly asking, please take care of me. And that soul asking for help doesn't want quick fixes. It doesn't need ready-made answers, superpower slogans, or hollow motivational phrases. It wants presence, it wants to be heard. It wants space to be what it is, with all its contradictions, all its repressed feelings, all its forgotten pieces. The soul cries for help when you've disconnected so deeply from yourself that you can no longer recognize what you like, what you need, what you feel. And it speaks to you through the body, through the mind, through exhaustion, because that's the only way it knows how to be heard. And here's the truth no one told you. Feeling is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign that your soul is still alive, that it still longs for meaning, that it still wants to exist with truth, that it still hopes to be rescued. And if it's crying out now, listen. Don't get distracted, don't run, don't correct yourself, just listen. Allow yourself to feel whatever comes. Allow yourself to fall apart, because sometimes the only way to rebuild is to allow yourself to collapse, not to lose yourself, but to finally find yourself in a more honest place, a place where you can be whole, where you no longer have to fake strength, when what you truly need is tenderness. You're there, moving, doing what needs to be done. You wake up, work, reply to messages, laugh at the right moments, and still you feel a void you can't explain, as if you're alive only on the outside, as if your body is present, but your soul is on airplane mode. You breathe, but you don't feel. You speak, but you don't hear yourself. You exist, but you no longer inhabit your own life. And over time, that numb state becomes the norm. What once was discomfort becomes routine. Until one day you look around and think, my life is here, but I'm no longer in it. That's the weight of living without feeling alive. A kind of emotional death where nothing seems to make sense, even though everything is in place. A steady job, a functioning routine, even leisure moments. But nothing touches you, nothing fills you, nothing awakens you, and that confuses you. Because technically, everything's fine, but you know it's not. Because truly living is more than standing upright. It's more than showing up. Living is feeling connected. It's looking within and recognizing who's there. It's feeling pleasure, pain, fear, hope, not just moving through days as if checking boxes. But when disconnection sets in, life becomes theater. You rehearse reactions, imitate gestures, mimic who you once were, but everything feels lukewarm. Something essential is missing. And maybe what's missing is you, your essence, the part that was swallowed up by years of self-pressure, emotional repression, survival mode. Because when you live for others, for what they expect, need, project, it's easy to lose yourself, easy to stop living and just keep going. And living like that is heavy. Heavy because there's no color, heavy because there's no soul, heavy because deep down you know you could be more. Not in the sense of doing more, but feeling more. Feeling emotions, feeling like you belong to yourself. And that silent absence comes at a high price. It steals your enthusiasm, dulls your spark, kills your drive to create, makes you think that maybe life is just this, and convinces you to stop searching for more. And that's where the danger lies. When you start believing this numb existence is the best it can get, but it's not. Living is something else. Living is presence, it's connection, it's truth. Living is having bad days and still feeling like they're yours. It's having breakdowns but feeling. It's crying and knowing there's a root. It's looking in the mirror and seeing someone there. And that reconnection doesn't come from outside. It doesn't come with a new job, a new relationship, a new routine. It comes from within. From the moment you decide you won't settle for just existing, that you won't keep numbing yourself for the sake of normalcy, that you won't keep being a spectator in your own journey. You don't need a huge external revolution. You need an inner reunion, a gesture of courage that says, I want to return. I want to feel again. And that process might be slow, yes, might be painful, but it's real. And life, once truly lived, never goes back. Because feeling, even when it hurts, is infinitely lighter than carrying the weight of an empty existence. You don't have to keep living like this. You don't have to accept apathy as destiny or emptiness as routine. There is a way out, but it's not magical, not immediate, and it doesn't come wrapped in ready-made promises. It begins in a much simpler and much harder place: recognition. Recognizing that something isn't right. Recognizing that the exhaustion isn't just physical, that the lack of motivation isn't laziness, that the sadness isn't overreaction, that what you feel is real, legitimate, urgent, and that continuing to ignore this silent cry only prolongs the suffering. Because there is no possible transformation while you pretend there is no pain. This recognition isn't about understanding everything. It's not about getting a diagnosis or finding a perfect explanation. It's about looking at yourself honestly and saying, "I'm not okay." That phrase, when said truthfully, has power because it breaks the cycle of denial. It opens the door to listening, to care, to change, and it's from that moment that the path begins to take shape. Maybe with small steps, a conversation with someone you trust, a pause in your frantic pace, a cry for help, the beginning of therapy, or simply a moment of silence where you allow yourself to feel without judgment. And no, that doesn't mean everything will be solved overnight. It doesn't mean the pain will vanish with a snap. But it does mean that you've stopped fighting yourself, that you've decided, even afraid, to stand up for your soul. And that changes everything. Because when you stop being the enemy of your own emotions, you start working in favor of your healing. You begin to listen to what hurts. You begin to notice what's missing. You begin slowly to return to yourself. And that return is the first breath after being submerged for so long. Recognition isn't weakness. It's the opposite. It's courage. It's emotional maturity. It's saying, enough of surviving. I want to live. Even if living for now just means stopping, just breathing, just existing without pressure. Because the way out often doesn't begin with grand gestures. It begins with an internal act of validation. It begins when you choose to stop running, when you look in the mirror and instead of judging yourself, you embrace yourself. When you understand that you no longer need to stay on autopilot, that you can and should take breaks. Rethink your path. Listen to yourself. Start over. There is a way out, and it's not out there. It's not in the next achievement, nor in the next distraction. It's inside, in the place where your truth lives, where your pain asks to be heard, where your most uncomfortable feelings just want to be acknowledged. And when you look at them with compassion, something inside you begins to realign. You begin to remember who you are, beyond performance, roles, appearances. You begin to reclaim the right to feel, to choose, to exist with authenticity. And maybe today, now in this exact moment, you are ready. Ready to stop running, ready to say, I see my pain, and from now on it won't be my enemy anymore. It will be my starting point. Because recognition is just that. It's not the end of pain. It's the beginning of possibility. And every possibility begins when you finally allow yourself to be whole.